Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the most unwanted job descriptions in medieval Europe, the executioner. And that's saying something in a time when rat catcher and full-time plague survivor were legitimate career paths. From swinging the sword of justice to being cursed, feared, and socially exiled, the life of a medieval executioner was a strange, brutal paradox. He was necessary, but never welcome. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on the fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you've just been born. Hooray! A bouncing baby bundle of joy, swaddled in wool, baptized in holy water, and immediately cursed with generational trauma. You're the newest member of a family of executioners, medieval society's most necessary yet least invited profession. While other children are destined to churn butter or one day inherit a sheep farm, you've been born into the one job that guarantees everyone will avoid you like a coughing stranger during a plague year. Your future is set. Sharp metal, public crowds, and a lifetime of being the guy no one makes eye contact with, even when you're 6. And no, you don't get to choose. Executioner isn't something you apply to be. There's no medieval job fair with a booth that says, love justice, hate popularity, inquire within. If your dad swung the axe, guess what you're swinging after puberty? Even as a toddler, villagers whisper when you pass. You haven't even committed your first decapitation, and you're already treated like you bite livestock. The blacksmith's kid gets candy. You get suspicious glances and extra space in the pews. That is, if you're even allowed in church. And family dinners less, how was your day? And more, did you remember to oil the gallows chain? Your bedtime stories don't feature dragons unless they're being hanged for heresy. Your toys include miniature scaffolds. Your version of hide and seek usually ends in people hiding and never coming back. You can't even marry out of it. Most respectable families won't let their daughters within 5 feet of you, let alone the altar. Which is probably fine since your family name has been whispered like a curse word for the past 3 generations. That's Carl's boy. You know, the one who swung too deep last winter. And sure, there are perks. No one bullies the executioner's kid. Even the local bully doesn't want to end up as practice. You develop a strong back, a steady hand, and a deadpan stare that gets you out of most social events. Which is helpful because you're never invited anyway. So, there it is. You're not just born, you're branded. You didn't choose the axe life. The axe life chose you, and it's not letting go. By the time you're old enough to grow a beard or swing a training axe, you've already accepted one core truth. The town needs you, but they'd prefer you stay out of sight, preferably behind a curtain, a hill, or a moral veil of plausible deniability. As a medieval executioner, you're society's walking contradiction. You do the work no one else dares to do, and for that, you're rewarded with silence, suspicion, and the occasional terrified blessing from 10 feet away. People talk to you like you're a haunted well, useful in a crisis, but deeply unsettling the rest of the time. Need someone publicly disemboweled? The town calls you. Need someone invited to their daughter's wedding feast? Not a chance. You're the final solution to every problem the sheriff doesn't want on his conscience. And yet, once the deed is done and the head rolls into the hay, everyone suddenly remembers they had somewhere else to be. Usually anywhere that isn't next to you. In court records, you're referred to as the blade of justice. In tavern gossip, you're that creepy guy who probably talks to skulls. You could save a child from drowning, and someone would still whisper, yes, but how many people has he chopped in half? To them, you are both punishment and paranoia, a reminder that the law has teeth, big, sharp, public ones. And let's not pretend it's just the peasants. Even nobles turn their nose up. They'll pay you in silver and pat themselves on the back for upholding justice, but you'll never be invited to dine in their halls unless it's to demonstrate proper axe form between courses. Best of all, if something goes wrong, let's say you botch an execution or someone gets squeamish mid-torture, it's your head on the proverbial and possibly literal chopping block. The same crowd that cheered your last performance will turn on you faster than a spooked chicken. You're not a man, you're a tool. And everyone pretends you don't exist unless they need something violently removed. So yes, the town needs you, but they'd rather you come in through the back door, wear a hood, and leave before sunrise. While other boys are learning how to plow fields, shoe horses, or if they're especially blessed, read, your education is a bit more specialized. You're not studying scripture or sewing techniques, you're learning how to sever spines in one clean stroke. Welcome to your childhood apprenticeship, where precision isn't optional and failure doesn't just cost lives, it ruins your reputation before you even get one. Your parent or some grizzled older executioner with arms like tree trunks teaches you the sacred art of not messing up in front of a crowd. Because while everyone may pretend they hate what you do, they absolutely will judge your form, footwork, and follow-through like it's the medieval Olympics. Your curriculum includes chopping techniques, because missing the neck by even an inch turns justice into a comedy show. Anatomy, because you need to know which bones are easiest to crack and which ones will make your axe bounce back in public humiliation. And stage presence, because let's face it, every execution is a public performance. You're the final act, the main event, the reason people leave their farms and bring their kids to town square. Think of it as dinner theater. But instead of dessert, there's dismemberment. There's no practice dummy, unless you count the occasional pig carcass or extremely unlucky rebel. Most of what you learn is on the job. And let's be honest, everyone remembers your first time, especially if it doesn't go well, especially if you freeze or shake, or, heaven forbid, take more than one swing. Nothing haunts you like a half-beheaded criminal and an impatient crowd. You're trained to be calm, efficient, unshakable, but no one teaches you how to cope. There's no medieval HR department, no stress leave, no how not to think about severed heads self-care scroll. You just sharpen your blade, swallow your guilt, and get ready for the next performance. And what do you get in return for your finely honed lethal expertise? Not admiration, not gratitude, just silence. Maybe a few extra coins and the lingering stench of death on your clothes and soul. You're not just trained to kill, you're trained to carry the weight of it quietly. Picture this. It's a sunny morning, the market square is bustling. Bakers are selling bread that smells vaguely edible, blacksmiths are banging away with impressive confidence, and the butcher is enthusiastically waving a cleaver. Everyone is shouting prices, gossiping, living their little medieval lives. Then you show up. The crowd parts like you're carrying the plague in one hand and a severed head in the other. And to be fair, sometimes you are. But even when you're just there to buy turnips, people scatter like rats from a torch. You see, executioners were often forbidden or heavily discouraged from even entering public markets. In some towns, you had to wait until after hours to buy food. In others, you had your own special corner of shame where vendors left your goods out for you to collect like a cursed medieval DoorDash. Why? Because apparently the man who handles legal killings is somehow too unclean to touch a radish. If you dared to mingle with the regular folks, it got awkward fast. Merchants would grab your coins with tongs, or worse, refuse them altogether. You could be holding clean silver, and they'd act like you'd handed them a live scorpion dipped in guilt. Oh, no, not from you, good sir. We're, out of cabbage today. Children are yanked away. Crosses are made. One particularly dramatic fishwife spits every time you walk by. Not at you, just near enough to make her feelings perfectly clear. Touching goods was risky business. If you picked up a loaf of bread, no one else would want it. If you so much as grazed the apples, that entire crate might be dumped in a ditch. Out of sheer spiritual panic, one brush of your cursed executioner fingers and it's farmed to forbidden. Eventually, most executioners learn to send someone else to do their shopping, if they could. A relative, a bribed servant, anyone with a less unsettling aura, someone whose hands don't smell faintly of burning justice. So you retreat again, back to your lonely dwelling, your private food supply, your increasingly antisocial lifestyle. Because even when you're off the clock, the town still remembers who you are, and they'd really prefer if you didn't touch the cheese. Congratulations, you've got your own place. Unfortunately, it's not in town, not even close. Your new address is beyond the northern gate, past the gallows, next to the wild boars. As a medieval executioner, you don't just get the cold shoulder, you get full-on banishment by zoning law. You're not allowed to live inside the city walls with the normal people. Instead, your residence is somewhere between a hermit's hut and a haunted outpost. You're less village member and more unpleasant forest NPC. There's a reason for this. Of course, a combination of superstition, religion, and good old-fashioned hypocrisy. Coins and the lingering stench of death on your clothes and soul. You're not just trained to kill, you're trained to carry the weight of it quietly. Picture this. It's a sunny morning. The market square is bustling. Bakers are selling bread that smells vaguely edible. Blacksmiths are banging away with impressive confidence. And the butcher is enthusiastically waving a cleaver. Everyone is shouting prices, gossiping, living their little medieval lives. Then you show up. The crowd parts like you're carrying the plague in one hand and a severed head in the other. And to be fair, sometimes you are. But even when you're just there to buy turnips, people scatter like rats from a torch. You see, executioners were often forbidden or heavily discouraged from even entering public markets. In some towns, you had to wait until after hours to buy food. In others, you had your own special corner of shame, where vendors left your goods out for you to collect like a cursed medieval DoorDash. Why? Because apparently the man who handles legal killings is somehow too unclean to touch a radish. If you dared to mingle with the regular folks, it got awkward fast. Merchants would grab your coins with tongs, or worse, refuse them altogether. You could be holding clean silver, and they'd act like you'd handed them a live scorpion dipped in guilt. Oh, no, not from you, good sir. We're, out of cabbage today. Children are yanked away, crosses are made. One particularly dramatic fishwife spits every time you walk by. Not at you, just near enough to make her feelings perfectly clear. Touching goods was risky business. If you picked up a loaf of bread, no one else would want it. If you so much as grazed the apples, that entire crate might be dumped in a ditch out of sheer spiritual panic. One brush of your cursed executioner fingers, and it's farmed to forbidden. Eventually, most executioners learned to send someone else to do their shopping, if they could. A relative, a bribed servant, anyone with the less unsettling aura. Someone whose hands didn't smell faintly of burning justice. And so, you retreat again, back to your lonely dwelling, your private food supply, and your increasingly antisocial lifestyle. Because even when you're off the clock, the town still remembers who you are, and they'd really prefer it if you didn't touch the cheese. Congratulations, you've got your own place. Unfortunately, it's not in town, not even close. Your new address is beyond the northern gate, past the gallows, next to the wild boars. As a medieval executioner, you don't just get the cold shoulder, you get full-on banishment by zoning law. You're not allowed to live inside the city walls with the normal people. Instead, your residence is somewhere between a hermit's hut and a haunted outpost. You're less village member and more unpleasant forest NPC. There's a reason for this, of course. A combination of superstition, religion, and good old-fashioned hypocrisy. The same folks who hire you to swing an axe at 10 a.m. don't want to risk your allegedly cursed energy wafting through the neighborhood by 6 p.m. Your house is usually located near the execution grounds, because that's convenient. Convenient for who exactly remains unclear. Not for you, certainly. You live in the shadow of your work, literally. Gallows creaking in the wind, crows eyeing you like you're next. Sometimes corpses still hang in view of your breakfast table. Bon appetit! The place itself, it's yours technically, a gift from the city, which is medieval for we dumped some lumber in a field and said good luck. Drafty, damp, and wonderfully secluded, your home might be the only one in Christendom with a doormat that says, "Abandoned hope, ye who enter here." Not for visitors, but for your own self-esteem. No neighbors, no casual strolls, no visiting merchants or passing monks. Just you, your tools, and the occasional raccoon with no sense of personal space. You might hear the church bells in the distance, but you won't hear the laughter of the marketplace. You're close enough to serve the town, but far enough to never belong to it. And when storms roll in, who rushes to check on you? No one. The town forgets you exist until the next criminal needs a very final solution. So there you live, outside the walls, a man apart, visible only when your presence is required, like thunder, ominous, functional, and best appreciated from a distance. So, you're an executioner, you live outside the walls, your handshake is treated like biohazard, and your grocery runs require diplomatic finesse. But surely you can find comfort in family, right? Right? Well, here's the thing. Medieval executioners did have families, they just had a hard time starting them. See, once your occupation is known, your dating prospects plummet faster than a heretic through a trap door. No one wants to marry the guy whose job description includes the phrase, clean up arterial spray. Respectable families lock their doors when you walk by. Fathers hold their daughters closer. Even the town drunk who once proposed to a goat looks at you and says, bit much, don't you think? So your dating pool ends up being shallow, very shallow. Often the only people willing to marry executioners are other outcasts, gravediggers, knackers, lepers, or if you're lucky, widows whose standards have taken serious structural damage. Romantic candlelit dinners? Try conversations whispered in alleys so no one sees her talking to you. And if you do manage to marry and have children, they inherit your profession like a curse sewn into their skin. Sons are trained from youth to swing steel with surgical precision, and daughters, well, they carry the name, which is usually enough to be socially exiled by age 6. It's not so much a family as it is a legally necessary support staff. Your family can't attend festivals, can't walk through town together, can't pretend to be normal for even a single Sunday. If they do go to church, they sit in the bag or they don't go at all. Because even salvation has bouncers. And over time, that isolation takes a toll. You love your children, sure, but you also pass them a future that smells like blood and loneliness. The family tree doesn't grow. It repeats. Same job, same shame, same invisible wall between you and the rest of humanity. There are no proud portraits, no family crests, just a long line of people who wore hoods not to hide their faces, but because the world never wanted to see them in the first place. So, you've executed your duties literally all week. You've lopped off heads, disemboweled a heretic or two, and maybe even cleaned your blade with holy water out of sheer anxiety. Surely it's time to confess your sins, right? Light a candle, say a prayer, start fresh. Well, not quite. In the eyes of the medieval church, you're somewhere between necessary evil and walking contradiction. Yes, you enforce divine justice. Yes, you serve the state and uphold law and order. But also, and this is important, you kill people for a living, which is inconveniently a sin. And so, despite doing God's dirty work, you're not exactly welcomed in his house. Many executioners were outright denied confession. Some priests wouldn't listen. Others insisted you undergo ritual cleansing before stepping inside the church, which is tricky because no amount of soap washes away a reputation. And don't even think about receiving Holy Communion. That was reserved for clean souls. Yours is more of a permanent stain. It's a cruel irony. You kill with state approval, yet spiritually you're treated like a man who strangles kittens for fun. Even lepers, who at least had a medical excuse, were often treated with more compassion. Weddings? Not in the church. Christenings? Maybe if the priest is having a generous day and half the town isn't glaring at him. Funerals? Don't count on it. Some executioners weren't even buried in consecrated ground. They got the ditch outside the cemetery walls. Prime real estate for exiles, suicides, and people who forgot to tithe. So where does that leave you spiritually? Nowhere comforting. You spend your life surrounded by death, and yet you have no path to forgiveness. You can't unburden yourself. You can't cry to a friar or light a votive for your sins. Instead, you carry them quietly, heavily. Sometimes you drink. Sometimes you scream into the woods. Sometimes you just sharpen your blade again. Even when you believe you're doing right, when the law is clear, the trial fair, you still go home unsure whether you're damned by man, by God, or both. Because even in a world where everyone sins, you're the one who made a profession out of it. There's nothing quite like the pressure of performing executions in front of a screaming crowd. It's part justice, part ritual, part public entertainment, and you're the main act. Forget about nerves, forget about bad weather. The crowd doesn't care if your wrist hurts, if your stomach's empty, or if the axe is a little dull from last week's double hanging. They came to see a show, and you're holding the spotlight, the blade. The goal is simple. One clean swing. A fast, clean beheading is the gold standard. Anything less, and the murmurs begin. Miss by an inch, the crowd gasps. Take a second swing, they groan. A third, now they're booing. Some are laughing. One kid just started crying. Someone throws an onion. And let's be honest, you feel it too. The shame, the failure, the victim still twitching on the block, the blood spurting wrong, your boots sticky with regret. You weren't trained for this part. The psychological shrapnel that comes from turning someone's last moment into a civic embarrassment. Sometimes the axe gets caught in bone. Sometimes the condemned jerks at the last second. Sometimes your hand just slips. And in those moments, your entire reputation and possibly your job hangs in the balance. Because here's the thing, no one cares how hard the job is. They just want it to look easy. Executioners are supposed to be clinical, unemotional, precise. If you falter, you risk looking weak. And in a world obsessed with strength, weakness is contagious. And the rumors spread fast. He needed 2 swings. His hand was shaking. The guy suffered. You become a cautionary tale whispered in breadlines. Don't end up like that poor soul. Or worse, like the guy who couldn't even finish the job. So you go home, scrub your blade, and relive every mistake, every gasp, every groan. You replay it until your mind is too tired to keep spinning. And even then, it lingers. Because in your world, the axe doesn't just fall on the condemned, it hovers over you too, every time you step onto that platform. So, you've done the deed. The crowd has gasped, gawked, and dispersed. The condemned is headless. Justice is served, and the village squares back to selling cabbage. Time to pack up and head home, right? Not even close. Being an executioner wasn't just about swinging an axe. That was the dramatic part, the flashy moment. The rest, far messier, far quieter, and far more grotesquely underappreciated. Because someone has to deal with the body. And surprise, it's you. You might be asked to burn the body, bury it in unconsecrated ground, or stuff it into a shallow grave under the gallows, the medieval equivalent of a garbage chute. No funeral, no ceremony, just the faint hope that the local dogs don't dig it up. And you don't get gloves, or soap, or a break. You are effectively the sanitation department of death, the final cleaner of sin, the silent janitor of justice, and no one thanks you. In fact, the same people who cheered the execution now avoid you even harder because you smell like ash and entrails. There are also the side jobs. Torture, that's on you. Branding criminals, you again. Public shaming setups, you're the guy with the hammer and nails. Sometimes they'll even have you flog someone while reading scripture aloud, multitasking your way through a moral meltdown. Oh, and if a noble demands discretion, guess who's cleaning up the noble's mess with 0 witnesses and a very real understanding that if anyone talks, they're next. Executioner by title, yes, but by function, you're medieval society's all-purpose horror technician. When the crowds disappear, the priests go silent, and the court scribes head back to their parchment. You stay behind. You finish the job no one else can stomach. For all the fear, revulsion, and existential dread wrapped around your role, being an executioner does come with one undeniable perk. You get paid. In fact, you're often paid more than your average peasant, sometimes much more. Executions, torture sessions, dismemberment duties, they all come with a tidy purse of silver. Add in bribes for extra discretion or making it quick, and you might even find yourself with the kind of money that makes bakers envious. But here's the catch. You can't spend it like a normal person. You walk into a tavern with a jingling pouch, and suddenly the room gets real quiet. The barkeep pours your ale, then wipes the counter like your presence is a stain. You tip him double. He still won't look you in the eye. You go to buy a new tunic, and the tour hands you the finished product with tongs. The coins you give him are real, but to him they're cursed. Blood money, he mutters as if the silver will bite him. And heaven forbid you try to give charity. One time you tried donating to the church. They took the donation, then used it to pay someone else to clean the holy relics, just in case. Sure, you can accumulate wealth. You might even build a small home with actual furniture, rare for your class. But the irony, the more you earn, the more isolated you become. You're rich, yes, but rich like a dragon hoarding gold in a cave, alone and feared. People assume the money makes up for the stigma, that a heavy purse balances a heavy conscience. But gold doesn't silence nightmares. It doesn't scrub blood from your memory or buy you back your humanity. It just sits there, cold, shiny, useless for the things that matter. You don't buy peace with money in the Middle Ages. You buy silence. You buy space. You buy the right to drink alone at a corner table without being told to leave. And deep down, you know the truth. Every coin you carry was bought with someone else's last breath. That's the currency of your life. And no amount of it ever buys forgiveness. In a town of maybe a few hundred people, everyone knows who you are. They know your name, your house, your footsteps, your job, and most importantly, your shadow. They whisper it. That's him. They murmur it as you pass. Executioner. They pull their children close as if you might accidentally decapitate someone mid-walk. And yet, despite this widespread recognition, no one really knows you. You could have a favorite song, a childhood memory, a surprisingly decent hand at wood carving. But that doesn't matter. Your entire identity is reduced to one role, the blade. People don't see you. They see what you do. You're a living job description. Even when you're off duty, just walking to buy onions, people cross the street like you're contagious. No one asks how you're doing. No one asks if the job weighs on you because they've already decided you don't feel anything. To them, you're not a man with doubts or regrets. You're the axe with legs. It's a strange duality. You are known by everyone, yet fully understood by no one. You're present in every courtroom sentence, every hushed bedtime story, every moral lesson whispered to misbehaving kids, but never really invited into the world you serve. When you walk into the tavern, voices quiet. When you leave, they rise again. You hear laughter, but never with you, always after you've gone. There's no, how was your day? No, you holding up all right? No, do you ever wish it was different? If you speak too much, you're unsettling. If you say nothing, you're cold. If you smile, that's the worst. It's creepy. The man who swings the sword shouldn't be smiling, ever. And so, over time, you play the part. You become the figure they already believe you are. Grim, silent, and carved from stone. You learn to stand still, to nod, to fade. Because while everyone in town knows your name, not a single one of them knows you. You're a myth with a pulse, a necessary ghost, familiar in function, alien in everything else. After a long day of dismemberment, blood-stained boots, and polite public trauma, you finally return home to your charming little hut outside the walls, surrounded by silence and a slight smell of iron. You take off your cloak, you lay down your axe, you sit at the edge of your straw mattress and try to be human again. But the nightmares are already waiting. You lie down and close your eyes. And there they are, the faces. Not heroic, not villainous, just people. Some screamed, some cried, some mumbled prayers with trembling lips. Some looked you straight in the eye as if to say, "You know this is wrong." And the worst ones? The ones who said nothing at all, the calm ones, the resigned ones, the ones who accepted their fate faster than you ever could. You relive every swing. You feel every bone crunch. You hear the gasps of the crowd, their disgust, their delight. You see the bodies falling in slow motion like tragic marionettes with their strings cut. There's no escape. Not in sleep, not in silence, not in drink. Believe me, you've tried. You start to flinch at everyday sounds. The clatter of firewood, the snap of rope, the creak of wooden stairs. All reminders, all echoes. And you never forget the ones you botched. The blade that hesitated, the cut that went crooked, the moan of someone who was supposed to die faster. You carry that. No one checks on you. There's no medieval counselor for post-traumatic decapitation disorder. You don't write letters, you don't cry in public. You stare into the fire and hope your soul doesn't go fully numb before your hands do. Sometimes, late at night, you ask yourself, what if they were innocent? What if justice got it wrong? What if I got it wrong? But you already know the answer doesn't matter because the sentence was passed, the crowd gathered, the axe fell, and the nightmare stayed. You were trained to kill, not to grieve. But your dreams didn't get the memo. So you wake up with clenched fists, aching temples, and blood that won't wash away because it's not on your hands anymore. It's in your head. The thing no one tells you when you become an executioner is this. You don't retire. There's no farewell feast, no pension, no golden axe mounted on a plaque. You just start shaking one day, or missing, or dreaming too loudly, and the town begins to whisper, not with sympathy, with concern, not for you, for efficiency, because to them, you're not a man, you're a mechanism, a moving part in the justice machine. As long as the blade is sharp and the swing is steady, they nod from a distance and pretend you don't exist. But the moment you falter, the instant your hands tremble on the block or you take a second too long with the rope, the machine kanks, and they all notice. Suddenly, you're a problem, a liability. Not because your soul is unraveling, but because you're disrupting the spectacle. The crowd didn't come to see guilt, they came to see competence. So the town begins its quiet transition. Maybe a younger man, your apprentice, your son, your distant cousin, starts handling smaller jobs. A flogging here, a branding there, then a hanging. No one tells you you've been replaced. You simply start getting fewer summons. The coin slows, the stares change from fear to faint pity, the most dangerous kind of pity, because it means they've stopped needing you. And when you're finally forgotten, it's not by accident, it's design. You fade into your cottage outside the walls, your tools rusting beside you, your hands once strong and precise now tremble when you lift a spoon. Your knees ache from a lifetime of kneeling at the block, and no one comes to visit. Your name becomes an uncomfortable footnote in village memory. Remember old what's-his-name, the one with the axe? Oh yeah, didn't he go mad? And when you finally die, probably alone, The church is still unsure whether to bury you inside the gate or just leave you under a tree somewhere. Because in the end, you were never part of the town. You were a service, and services, when worn out, are quietly discarded. At first, the job made sense. The condemned were thieves, murderers, heretics. You were the arm of the law, the edge of justice. You didn't question. You executed efficiently, publicly, without hesitation. But as the years dragged on and the block grew slick with repetition, something began to itch beneath the surface of your certainty. It starts small. A man sentenced for stealing a loaf of bread. He had 5 children, no defense, just hunger. Then a woman accused of witchcraft because she muttered prayers in the wrong language. You saw the fear in her eyes, the absolute confusion as the noose slipped over her neck. And then the nobles, the ones who ordered deaths not because of guilt, but because of politics, land, jealousy, or the need to make a statement. Someone disappear. You start to realize you're not just burying criminals, you're burying secrets. The executioner's block becomes a filter, one that sifts out the inconvenient, the poor, the powerless. And you're the final stamp, the one who makes it irreversible. You want to believe in law, in structure, in right and wrong, but the voices that once declared guilt so confidently now ring hollow. You've heard the crowd cheer as a man screamed. You've seen magistrates exchange glances like merchants haggling over a soul. And you were always told it is not your place to judge. You only carry out the sentence. But what happens when the sentence is wrong? There's no room to ask, no confessional booth, no forum. You sit alone at night, sharpening your blade, wondering how many lives were ended because someone needed a message sent. And you can't say anything, not just because it's dangerous, but because who would listen? You're the executioner. No one believes the man who wears the hood. You don't get opinions, you get orders. So, you bury justice one stroke at a time. Not because you want to, but because you have to. Because in this world, truth is a luxury, and you're just the broom that sweeps it under the scaffold. And the worst part? You're starting to think you were never justice's sword, just its grave digger. You spent your life in service, not to glory, not to gold, not even to justice, just to duty, the grim, blood-soaked kind no one talks about at feasts. And when your end finally comes, it isn't dramatic. No poetic final words, no family gathered at your bedside, just a cough that doesn't go away. A slow fade in a straw-stuffed bed that still smells faintly of iron and damp rope. One final breath, and that's it. No bells toll, no priest rushes to your side, no one weeps. Your body is found by a local boy, or maybe not found at all until the smell becomes a problem. The town clerk marks your passing in one sentence scribbled on the back of the tax ledger. Executioner, deceased, replacement pending. There's no funeral procession, no carved headstone, maybe a wooden marker if someone remembers, but it won't last the winter. You're not buried in the churchyard, of course. You're laid in the earth outside the gates, the same gates you were never allowed to pass through in life. Executioners, after all, were unclean, tainted, useful, disposable. You were the one who buried hundreds, and yet no one truly buries you. The town moves on quickly. There's always another blade, another son, another poor soul who inherits the job like a curse wrapped in tradition. In the years to come, people might speak of you in fragments. The one who beheaded that baron. Remember the one who drank alone and never looked anyone in the eye? Or worse, what was his name again? Your legacy isn't stories or children or peace. It's silence. It's absence. It's the space you filled that no one wants to talk about. And maybe that's fitting. You spent your life ensuring the guilty were forgotten. You just didn't realize you'd be forgotten with them. So, In the end, your death mirrors your life. Necessary, but never mourned. Because in medieval society, you were never meant to be remembered. You were meant to be endured. And now, you're finally not. It all started with water running through a ditch. On January 24th, 1848, a man named James W. Marshall, working on the American River near Cole, California, looked down and saw something strange glinting in the sun. At first, he didn't believe it. It was just a tiny yellow flake. Could have been fool's gold. But no, it passed the scratch test. It was real gold. Actual gold. He ran to tell his boss, John Sutter, who was less than thrilled. Sutter wasn't thinking about riches. He was thinking about land. He was building an agricultural empire, and he knew what a gold discovery meant. Chaos, stampedes of strangers, squatter claims, and the end of his carefully laid dreams. So the two men tried to keep it quiet. Spoiler, they failed miserably. Within weeks, the rumors spread like wildfire, literally faster than the mail system. Locals were showing up with pans and pickaxes. People abandoned jobs mid-shift. Sailors jumped ship in San Francisco and vanished into the hills. Newspapers didn't even bother fact-checking. Gold found in California was printed like gospel. And then, all hell broke loose. That summer, President Polk confirmed the discovery in a speech to Congress. That was it. The genie was out of the bottle. By 1849, over 90,000 people, nicknamed 49ers, were pouring into California by land, sea, and every miserable in-between route imaginable. And what started as one man squinting into a ditch became the largest mass migration in U.S. history. But here's the thing. Marshall never got rich. Neither did Sutter. The discoverers ended up broke, bitter, and pushed aside as the gold fever they unleashed consumed everything. So picture it. One accidental flicker in a muddy trench led to a global stampede, reshaped the map, fueled American expansion, and catapulted California from sleepy frontier to statehood in just 2 years. And the irony? The men who found the gold, they barely got a nugget. Now that we've set the stage, let's dive deeper into the madness, the migration, and the myths that turned California into the land of golden dreams and broken promises. Imagine you're a farmer in Ohio or a shopkeeper in Boston in 1849. You hear the whispers, see the headlines. Gold, mountains of it, just lying there for the taking in California. You sell your land, kiss your family goodbye, and start walking. Literally across the country. That's what thousands did. And just like that, the age of the 49ers had begun. They came in waves from every state and from places much farther. Latin Americans, Australians, Europeans, a once sleepy port town with maybe 1,000 residents before the rush. By the end of 1849, over 25,000 people had flooded in. It was a surreal transformation. Canvas tents popped up faster than buildings. Whole ships were abandoned and turned into warehouses, prisons, and hotels. You could walk through the harbor without touching water, just stepping from one deserted ship deck to another. It wasn't glamorous. Picture mountains of mud, makeshift saloons, overpriced pickaxes, and a real estate market that made Manhattan look like a bargain bin. A single egg might cost you $3. A decent pair of boots? Good luck. Maybe $100. Inflation ran wild, and scams were more common than gold nuggets. But that didn't matter. The dream was enough. Gold fever had its grip. Some struck it rich in a single afternoon. Others dug for years and died penniless. The rivers of the Sierra Nevada became clogged with miners, each swinging a pan, hoping their next scoop would change everything. This migration changed more than just California. It altered the entire American psyche. Suddenly, hard work wasn't just noble, it might make you wealthy. Manifest Destiny got a shot of adrenaline. California, barely a blip on the map a year before, was now the promised land. Of course, when thousands of desperate men pile into the same few valleys with shovels, things get tense. So, you've made it. You've walked across deserts, survived dysentery, and maybe even dodged a few bandits. You've reached gold country. Congratulations. Now, the real misery begins. Mining wasn't a glorious treasure hunt. It was backbreaking, soul-crushing labor. Forget chests full of gold coins. This was hours spent knee-deep in freezing rivers, swirling pans of gravel, praying to find a glimmer. Most didn't. For every lucky strike, there were 1,000 empty pans and 10,000 aching backs. In the early days, it was all about placer mining, scooping gravel from riverbeds and letting water do the work. But as the easy gold vanished, things escalated. Miners turned to rockers, sluices, and eventually hydraulic mining, a violent process that blasted entire hillsides apart with water cannons. It tore through the land and poisoned rivers. But it got results. The camps were chaos. Imagine a rowdy collection of tents, makeshift cabins, and saloons, all stitched together by desperation and mud. Bathing was optional. Food was scarce. Whiskey was not. Violence simmered under the surface. Arguments over claims turned deadly fast, especially when no one trusted the courts and everyone had a shovel. And then there was the disease. With thousands crammed into unsanitary camps, cholera and dysentery were just part of daily life. If you didn't die from contaminated water, you might die from a poorly cooked squirrel or an infection from a minor cut. There were no real doctors, just a few medicine men with more moonshine than medical knowledge. To top it all off, the prices were absurd. A shovel that cost $2 in New York could run you $30 in the mines. Eggs were luxury items. Laundry? Hope you enjoy wearing dirt. And if you struck it rich, good luck keeping it. Theft was rampant. One moment you had a pouch of gold dust, the next morning it was gone. And so was your bunkmate. But somehow the myth endured. People kept coming. The hope, the gamble, the raw possibility of it all was enough. Where gold went, people followed. And where people went, chaos wasn't far behind. The gold rush didn't just create mining camps, it birthed entire towns overnight. Places like Placer Hill, Marysville, and Deadwood. Yes, that Deadwood exploded in population faster than anyone could control. They were called boom towns, and the name fit. They boomed into existence and often collapsed just as fast. These were places without laws, without real government, and often without a moral compass. Judges were rare, sheriffs were rarer, and the gold, it made men desperate. If you didn't stake a good claim, someone might steal it. If you did stake a good claim, someone might still try to steal it or just shoot you and take it. Enter the vigilantes. In towns where the law hadn't arrived or had been paid off, citizens often took justice into their own hands. Vigilante groups formed, sometimes with noble intent, other times with pure greed. Trials could be quick, sentences quicker. If someone was caught stealing gold or cheating at cards, they might be hanged from the nearest tree without so much as a trial. It wasn't justice, it was convenience. The saloons were the nerve centers of these towns. Gambling, drinking, brawling, and the occasional accidental gunshot were all part of the soundtrack. And if you were looking for company, the soiled doves, women who'd followed the rush westward, ran the bordello, charging premiums for their companionship and surviving in a world heavily tilted against them. Still, not everyone was lawless. Many tried to build real communities. Churches sprang up, schools opened, and newspapers began circulating. San Francisco even formed a committee of vigilance to root out corruption and ended up becoming more powerful than the actual government. One strange detail, gold wasn't always used for buying things. It was too easy to shave off. Instead, people traded in gold dust, literally measured by tiny brass scales on the bar counter. A pinch might get you a meal, a full pouch, a night you might not remember. But boomtowns weren't built to last. Once the gold dried up, so did the population. Many towns were abandoned, becoming ghost towns almost overnight. While prospectors chased dreams of wealth, others paid a price that was far higher than gold. The gold rush didn't just create mining camps. It birthed entire towns overnight. Places like Placerville, Marysville, and Deadwood. Yes, that Deadwood exploded in population faster than anyone could control. They were called boom towns, and the name fit. They boomed into existence and often collapsed just as fast. These were places without laws, without real government, and often without a moral compass. Judges were rare, sheriffs were rarer, and the gold, it made men desperate. If you didn't stake a good claim, someone might steal it. If you did stake a good claim, someone might still try to steal it or just shoot you and take it. Enter the vigilantes. In towns where the law hadn't arrived or had been paid off, citizens often took justice into their own hands. Vigilante groups formed, sometimes with noble intent, other times with pure greed. Trials could be quick, sentences quicker. If someone was caught stealing gold or cheating at cards, they might be hanged from the nearest tree without so much as a trial. It wasn't justice, it was convenience. The saloons were the nerve centers of these towns. Gambling, drinking, brawling, and the occasional accidental gunshot were all part of the soundtrack. And if you were looking for company, the soiled doves, women who'd followed the rush westward, ran the bordello, charging premiums for their companionship and surviving in a world heavily tilted against them. Still, not everyone was lawless. Many tried to build real communities. Churches sprang up, schools opened, and newspapers began circulating. San Francisco even formed a committee of vigilance to root out corruption and ended up becoming more powerful than the actual government. One strange detail: gold wasn't always used for buying things. It was too easy to shave off. Instead, people traded in gold dust, literally measured by tiny brass scales on the bar counter. A pinch might get you a meal, a full pouch, a night you might not remember. But boomtowns weren't built to last. Once the gold dried up, so did the population. Many towns were abandoned, becoming ghost towns almost overnight. While prospectors chased dreams of wealth, others paid a price that was far higher than gold. The California gold rush wasn't just a story of fortune. It was also one of displacement, violence, and racial injustice. And the first to suffer were the Native American tribes. California's indigenous peoples had lived in the region for thousands of years. But once the rush began, they were driven from their lands with brutal speed. Forests were cut down, rivers poisoned by mercury and sediment, and hunting grounds overtaken by miners and boomtowns. Some tribes were forced into servitude under the guise of apprenticeships. Others were outright massacred. State-sanctioned militia campaigns were even funded to remove native populations. It was nothing short of a disaster. In just 2 decades, California's native population plummeted by nearly 90%. And then came the waves of immigrants, especially the Chinese. By the early 1850s, tens of thousands of Chinese laborers had arrived in California. Most intended to work, earn money, and send it home to their families. But what they got instead was suspicion, racism, and harsh taxes. In 1850, California passed a foreign miners tax targeting the Chinese specifically. They were banned from owning land, from testifying against white men in court, and from mining without paying extortion-level fees. Yet, despite these barriers, many Chinese miners endured. They formed tight-knit communities, reworked abandoned claims, and even built the backbone of future infrastructure, laying tracks for the Transcontinental Railroad. Just a few years later, Mexican and Latin American miners were also pushed out, often violently. Despite having legitimate claims and gold mining experience, they were hounded out of towns, labeled greasers, and stripped of their rights. And African Americans, both free and enslaved individuals, came west seeking opportunity. Some did find it, establishing businesses, farms, and even newspapers. But the racial lines were always shifting, and the promise of freedom came with no guarantees. Slavery wasn't legal in California,